Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's Q&A virtual lunch hour with myself, Jason Killeen, Assistant Executive Director of the Department of Cannabis Regulation. I oversee the department's administrative and licensing functions. I know our director was going to be joining us today, and if she's here with us and available to talk, I will turn it over to her to allow for her to give some opening remarks before we get started with the short presentation, and then we jump right into the questions.
Hi, Jason. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I believe these monthly Q&A series have been incredibly helpful for individuals. We want to encourage people to continue to attend. This particular event, we are allocating a presentation that we went over in a previous event yesterday. So I hope that you stick around, ask questions. We do answer questions that were pre-submitted first, but if you do have a question in real time, you can drop it right into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try our best to answer that question. Again, I just want to thank everybody for coming. Thanks to Jason, and I hope everybody gets what they need out of this event.
So sorry, I was just wrapping up George's question from the Q&A. So I just wanted to give a basic overview of how to register for a business tax registration certificate, as well as the benefits of the legal entity record before we jump to the Q&A. We presented this information last night during technical webinar number 2. We had a different slide format, which may be easier to read, and that information will be up on the department's website later this week, as well as this presentation, which has clickable links. But in order to ensure that folks are timely paying any invoices submitted by the department and the businesses are properly registered, you do have to register for a business tax registration certificate with the Office of Finance, and that information is required to be entered into your legal business entity record, which is a requirement for you to start an application. Before you can submit a complete business tax registration application, you will need to have an employer identification number from the Internal Revenue Service, and we provide the link to their website where you can request one. You'll also have to have registered your entity with the California Secretary of State, and they will provide you with a unique entity number, and we have the link to their website. And then you'll also have to register with the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration to receive a seller's permit for your business. So if you are a sole proprietor, of course, you're not going to have to register the entity with the Secretary of State because you are the entity, and you would be using your Social Security number in lieu of an employer identification number when you submit your business tax application. DCR is not the subject matter expert as it relates to the city's business tax system, nor the processes adopted by the Office of Finance. So if you have tax related questions or questions about how to complete their forms, please reach out to the Office of Finance, because if you reach out to DCR, we will either just tell you what's on the form or we will refer you over to the Office of Finance. They are the subject matter experts, and they do have a team of folks that do respond to cannabis businesses from within the Cannabis Support Unit. Once you've completed your business tax certificate application, and we do have the link page, you can email that completed business tax certificate application to dcrlicensing@lacity.org. We began this updated process on September 1st so that we could help facilitate the issuance of these BTRCs to our prospective applicants and licensees, so that the information can be uploaded to their records. So when they do submit an application, that information is printed on the invoice, which makes it easier for the Office of Finance to associate that payment with the business entity requesting the services. So this was done with the intent of streamlining the process, as well as making sure that when somebody does apply, they have the opportunity to pay those invoices as quickly as possible. What we saw in the past was businesses were either not submitting their business tax application form to finance when they submitted the invoice, which led to delays, or the application forms were incomplete and the Office of Finance was not able to establish a taxpayer account. Because the Office of Finance does all of our cashiering, you do have to have a taxpayer account with them in order for them to collect payment from you and then transmit the payment information over to the Department of Cannabis Regulation. Of course, if we don't show that you've paid your fees, we're not going to begin working on your record. The Office of Finance does have a business registration requirements FAQ, and we provide the link here. The Internal Revenue Service has helpful resources about starting a business, as well as the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. They have a permit and regulatory assistance program, and we provide the link. So they've got some great resources to help you navigate things beyond the commercial cannabis regulatory process, including how to pull building permits and how to apply for different permits that may be necessary in order for you to lawfully operate your business. How to register for a business tax registration certificate. This is the top part of the form. As I mentioned, you're going to have to disclose what entity type is pursuing a business tax registration certificate. You'll provide the legal name. If it's a sole proprietorship, which is an individual here, you would put the legal name of the sole proprietor. You would put the social security number down here in lieu of the FEIN if you're a sole proprietor. You do have to provide them with your sales tax number, the seller's permit from the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. So those are all prerequisites before they can process your application. So it is important that as you're creating entities, you are getting the necessary documentation from other governmental agencies so you can complete our local processes, because if you haven't done that yet, it's going to delay our ability to process you. And we want to make sure that folks can get processed as quickly as possible. The next piece I'm just going to quickly cover is creating a legal business entity record. You do have to have a user profile for your legal entity. Once you've created that, either you as an owner of that entity or logging in through the entity's profile can go ahead and navigate to the apply for the license, which is found under activities on our homepage through the DCR licensing portal. Once you're there, you'll be asked to read our general disclaimer. And after you've read the general disclaimer and accepted the terms, it will take you to the different record type options. You will go ahead and select business legal entity record. If you click the little triangle next to it, it'll show you the options underneath, and then you'll click on the radio button that says legal business entity application. And then from there, it'll drop you into the first page of the legal business entity record. On this page, you have the ability to submit the reference ID for the legal business entity. You can request equity share review for your legal entity in advance of submitting an application. So this is one of the new features that the director rolled out this summer, where people can request equity share review outside of the application process. You also have to provide your BTRC master account number. That is the first 10 digits of your BTRC number. And it's the 10-digit string that happens before the first hyphen. The last 5 digits of the number are related to the location for that particular taxpayer. Then you also have to provide your Secretary of State entity number. That's to ensure that when we communicate with the state, we're talking about the same entity. So we use those unique qualifiers like the entity number to ensure that we're talking about the same entity when we talk with state agencies. And then the last piece is you have the ability to designate an authorized agent on your form. If you request equity share review, you will be prompted to upload documentation that is necessary to demonstrate that you do meet the criteria to be a social equity applicant. So it will request additional forms. And then of course, if you select the authorized agent, you will be required to upload the authorized agent authorization form, which will have to be signed by a majority of the owners, as well as the social equity applicant if it's a social equity record. So these are the the components that you need to make sure you have in order to successfully submit a complete legal business entity record. You're going to have the ACA reference ID number for your legal business entity. You can choose whether or not you want to request equity share review. If you do, you will be required to upload your equity share, any operating agreements, any profit sharing agreements that may impact how revenue is distributed. You'll have to provide us with your BTRC master account number. You'll have to provide us with the Secretary of State Statement of Information entity number for your legal entity, if applicable. If you're a sole proprietorship, you won't have to create a legal business entity record. When you go to apply, you would select sole proprietor on the first screen of the application, which will bypass the need to have a legal entity record because you are the legal entity. If you designate an authorized agent, you'll have to upload that form. You're going to be required to identify all owners, primary personnel, and if applicable, an authorized agent. The contacts that you add to your record need to match the documentation submitted with your record. You'll upload all of the required ownership, primary personnel, business formation documents, operating agreements, and if applicable, social equity application specific information documents and forms. If you requested equity share review, you will be required to upload those social equity application specific documents. We will not accept placeholder documents. And depending on where you are in our process, if you're an existing licensee and you've already gone through the equity share review, you would not be charged additional fees. But if you're a new business entity and you're requesting services that haven't previously been provided, DCR staff will review the record and if applicable, apply the appropriate fees and generate an invoice for your particular record. The benefit of the legal business entity record is, one, we're storing the business related information separate and apart from the application information. So if you plan to apply for multiple licenses or plan to apply at multiple locations, we're only going to have to review this information once until you request a modification on it. So this information will be business entity driven, where we assume that everything is the same unless you request a modification. And once we've processed the modification on this record, those changes get pushed down to any applications or licenses that are authorized by the department. The benefit there is, under our old system, you would have to pay separate modification fees on each of your records, and the assigned analyst would be doing this review. And we found that there were discrepancies between the information being submitted, and it led to processing delays for the modification record. So this is really intended to be a streamlining function that's been implemented by the director. And then, of course, to the extent that you've registered your legal business entity record, when you submit an application, there's going to be fewer documents that DCR needs as part of the application process, which will streamline the review and reduce the time. So big things like looking at owners and primary personnel and doing equity share review, that can be done prior to submitting an application, which means that when you do submit the application and you've locked in the lease to operate your business, the period of time between when we start processing the application and when you may be eligible for an initial inspection will be shorter, which will help you get into licensure much quicker. So with that, that was a brief overview of the BTRC process that went into effect on September 1st to facilitate people getting their BTRs quicker, as well as the legal entity record. So now I'm going to go ahead and actually kick it over to the question and answers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Jason. Okay, our first question is the question of the day. It comes from Adron, George, Inokenti, and Daryl. When will we know if we were approved for the new verification process?
So we're currently processing the 1,275 requests that were submitted during the 60-day submission window. The municipal code provides DCR at least 90 days to complete our processing. The 90th day falls on Sunday, October 23rd, 2022. All DCR personnel are diligently working on getting these eligibility verification requests processed or supporting the processing of it. And folks are working overtime. We expect that the first wave of email notifications will be sent out on or around Friday, September 30th, 2022. After the first wave of emails are sent, we'll be sending additional emails as we complete our review on a rolling basis. I know it wasn't part of the question, but I just want to remind folks that DCR's determination is final and not appealable. So if DCR determines that you did not submit sufficient documentation and we were unable to verify you as a social equity individual applicant, there is not an appeal process. You don't get to appeal to the director, the commission, the city council, the mayor. Our decision is final, but you would be able to reapply as a social equity individual applicant when the process reopens in the future.
Okay, thank you. We had a question in the chat about these Zoom calls and whether they are recorded and available to view later.
Yes, they are. They are recorded and they are posted on the department's website, and our IT and website manager does attempt to put the links in the areas that are most applicable to the subject matter, whether it's social equity or licensing related.
Thank you. Maximus would like to know, are storefront addresses allowed to be changed if the landlord leases out a proposed property?
So if you have a license, then you're eligible to submit a relocation modification request. If you have not received a license, then you're not able to relocate your application to a different location. What you would do is you would submit a new pre-application review, and DCR would determine whether or not your proposed business premises location is eligible for further processing. The benefit of what the director implemented with this legal entity record is, to the extent that you've already created your legal entity record, we've already verified the entity and the personnel assigned to that entity. When you do submit your temporary approval application, if the location is deemed eligible, you're only really submitting documentation that is site specific, such as the lease, the premises diagram, and other things that are specific to your location, as well as paying the initial inspection fee for that location. So when you see the revised fees, you're going to see how the revised fee structure kind of plays out and kind of supports the fact that the review of the location and any documentation supported with that location is really application specific. So if it doesn't work out with your landlord, you will have to submit a new application for your new proposed location. Only licensees are able to relocate a license to a different location.
Okay, Nayruth B. Has DCR submitted a new report to the Plum Committee? And if so, when? If soon, when?
So DCR is preparing a report for the Plum Committee that addresses a number of report backs, as well as additional recommendations as it relates to the state's deadlines and some processing streamlining that we are recommending. I anticipate that in the near future, probably within the next 30 days, we will transmit a report to the Plum Committee with recommendations to allow for the relocation of certain applications or licenses outside of a community plan area. Ultimately, whether or not the council adopts that recommendation or which version of the recommendation they choose, we can't speak to, but we do anticipate that policymakers will be considering that issue before the end of the calendar year.
Okay, thank you. We had several questions on this subject matter from George, Lou, and Cami, also in the chat, regarding illegal shops in the city and how can one make money with so many?
So having seen the aggregate business tax revenue exceeding $140 million a year, I will tell you that there are businesses out there that are making money, even with the unlicensed businesses operating within the city. Unfortunately, DCR doesn't have the authority to address or shut down unlicensed cannabis businesses. We do provide information to LAPD, DWP, Building and Safety, and other enforcement agencies based on whether or not an application or a license has been issued at a specific location. The result of the enforcement actions have resulted in the shutdown and closure of over 300 unlicensed locations. And based on LAPD's most recent report, they believe that there's only 87 unlicensed retail storefronts operating. To the extent that you believe a business is engaged in unlicensed commercial cannabis activity, you should report it through the city's complaint portal and provide as much specific information as possible so that when the complaint is reviewed by LAPD, DWP, Building and Safety, they have as much information as possible to address that activity and, if applicable, take an enforcement action.
Okay, Rodolfo S. would like to know, can I use an S Corp to legally run a dispensary?
An S Corp is an entity type that could be lawfully registered and then be the applicant listed on a commercial cannabis application.
Okay, Rick H. After the verifying process, can I start looking for retail space for type 9?
The answer is yes. Type 9 is the non-storefront delivery license type. It is only available to verified social equity individual applicants. So if you are verified, you do have the ability to start looking for a location for that license type. Prior to submitting your application, I would recommend you create your BTRC if you have your entity already. And then, of course, if applicable, create your legal entity record so that you can have some of your documentation reviewed prior to submitting your application, so that if you do lock in that retail space, the period of time between when you start paying rent and when you're eligible for your initial inspection is cut in half.
Okay, Barry R. What do I need to open a storefront or to distribute to other stores?
So those are two different license types. A retail storefront license or a type 10 license allows you to sell cannabis to a consumer. So it's business to consumer. To distribute between a business and other licensed businesses, you would need a distribution license. Information about the license types and the application process are available on the department's website, in addition to the resources that you would need to put into place in order to apply for your BTRC, create your legal entity record, and then ultimately submit your application for the activities. The retail storefront is not currently open for, DCR is not accepting applications for that activity type, and we will be conducting the phase 3 retail round 2 lottery later this year to select social equity individual applicants that will have the opportunity to submit applications for that. And it's intended that that lottery will identify a sufficient number of applicants for the city to be considered unduly concentrated if all of those applicants ultimately receive a license. If they don't, we will have the authority to do additional lotteries, but the retail storefront type is not something you can just apply for.
Thank you. Darwin B. would like to know, do I have to have a functional POS that integrates with Metric to receive my temporary approval?
Yes and no. So your point of sale system is going to have to tie into Metric, in order for you to report your activities to the state, there is a dual licensing requirement. You do have to have both a city license and a state license, and you do have to be enrolled in metric and meet all of the state's requirements. To the extent that you may not have received your state license and met that requirement, it would not preclude DCR from issuing you temporary approval. However, you can't use that temporary approval until you've gotten both sets of licenses, and that is a requirement for you to lawfully operate. So if you did receive temporary approval and you were not properly tied into the metric system, it would be a violation, and you may be cited for a code violation, which would incur additional fees and fines for your business.
Beryl M asks, can a DBA be created under an existing S Corp or LLC for this business?
In general, a business entity can register with Los Angeles County a DBA or fictitious business name that they plan to utilize. And ultimately, they're the ones who consider whether or not that fictitious business name is going to be approved. I would refer you over to LA County and their office. I think we have links on our website that kind of navigate to that specific item, but you should be able to.
Okay, thank you. Nairuth B asks, have CEQA consultants started reviewing for 4013 forms? When will they start giving approvals?
So we are in the selection process right now for the first batch of 4013 forms. They will start that analysis later this year, and then the approvals will be on a rolling basis. And I anticipate that we'll start to get information back from the consultants before the end of the calendar year. And then DCR staff will have to review the information, and we may have to go back and forth with the consultant or the applicant if there's any concerns that we have with the documentation, the forms, or the analysis. So things are moving forward. It's in the works. We will start to give approvals and start allowing people to move into the annual application process. And right now, I don't have a concrete timeline for when the first sets of approvals will start, but I anticipate that it will either be Q4 of this year or Q1 of next year.
Charlene R asks, what metrics are currently captured regarding diversity and inclusion?
So DCR has two different license types. We have general licenses and we have social equity licenses. At the department level, we are tracking the number of general licenses and social equity licenses because that's how our program is created. In terms of specific demographics related to diversity, gender, inclusion, DCR does not capture any of that information, and it is not part of our review process, nor does it determine whether or not somebody is eligible and meet the requirements for licensure. The state does capture some of that information, and given the dual licensing nature, you may be able to request that information from the state and then match it up and marry it with the state license and the corresponding local license.
Okay, thanks. CP has a question regarding the legal entity record and issues that he's having. The People tab of the legal entity record application does not include an option for directors of a corporation. It also does not have an other option. How should we add these individuals to the legal entity record?
I'll talk to the Excella team about adding director as a standalone primary personnel type, but they are primary personnels. And if you go ahead and you tag them, we can go ahead and get it updated in the back office once the director option is added. In terms of other, that's really a like non-owner, non-primary personnel contact type. So we don't have that as an option because everybody listed on the legal entity record should have a defined role, and other isn't really considered a defined role based on our standards. When you do submit an application record, you have the ability to create application specific contact types like the neighborhood liaison, any consultants, law firms, or other folks that would be associated with that specific record. And other is an option for an application record, just not the legal entity record.
Thanks, Jason. Michelle D asks, for those of us with an abandoned application that have paid the refile fee and have a note saying action required, when will we be instructed how and when to proceed?
So if you refiled an abandoned application, your refiled application, once it's been vetted and you've paid the applicable fee, that action item, if you click on it, it will drop you into the actual application record. So the process for refiling is effectively the same as the process for going through the pre-application review, where if it's eligible for further processing, then you click on the action required button, and then that will start you off with the application record. And then you'll be able to upload additional information and move forward with the formal application process. The refiling and reviewing the refiled materials and whether or not it's eligible for refiling is just a step before the formal application process. So if you see action required, you can click on it and you can get into the application process.
Lucia C asks, how can we prepare for the license lottery? Are the dates for the lottery already set?
So DCR began providing technical assistance webinars on August 31st. The first webinar is already available on the department's website. We completed our second webinar last night, and that will be available on our website before the end of the week. We're having our third webinar on September 28th, and then we'll have a fourth webinar in October before the end of the 90-day processing period. I would encourage you to attend the technical assistance webinars. As I mentioned, the next one is on September 28th. We are scheduling these in the evening. Different information and how-tos are being provided, and all of those webinars are recorded and available on the DCR website. They will help you in, understanding the lottery registration process, as well as the general application process and what you could do to prepare yourself. So if you are selected, you can quickly navigate through the application process in the hopes of being able to submit a state provisional license application before their deadlines. And the date for the lottery has not been set. The code requires us to announce 15 days prior to the lottery when and how it will occur. And as we get closer to the ability to administer the lottery, we'll make those dates available. But right now, we don't have a concrete date.
Thanks, Jason. Drew M asks, do EMMDs have any grandfathered laws that allow them to relocate outside of the original zone?
The answer is no. So EMMDs, which are our phase one businesses, had limited grandfathering that would allow for them to stay at a non-compliant location from a zoning perspective if they met the distancing requirements that were allowed under Proposition D for a limited period of time. However, there is no grandfathering or anything else that allows an EMMD to circumvent the land use rules and the relocation rules set forth in the municipal code.
Okay. Howard P. asks, what is a micro license?
So a micro business license at the city level is a retail license type. There are two different types. There is the micro business license, which is the kind of a carbon copy of the retail storefront license. Micro businesses are allowed to be in different zones than retail licenses. And those zones that it would be allowed in are typically the zones where non-retail activities would be allowed. So the micro license can be basically partnered with non-retail activities in industrial and manufacturing zones where a standalone retail storefront license would not be allowed. Alternatively, we've got the delivery micro business license, and it's the same thing. Is if somebody was trying to be vertically integrated, there's additional zones that are available under that license type that do allow for the vertical integration of cultivation, distribution, or non-volatile manufacturing licenses. At the state level, it has a different meaning, but at the local level, it's only associated with either a retail storefront activity or a non-storefront delivery activity.
Okay, Frederick H. asks, can DCR offer more individual help?
So there's a variety of resources and technical assistance available to individuals. For social equity individual applicants, they do have access to one-on-one coaching, as well as low bono and pro bono legal services through the social equity program. For general applicants, today's Q&A session and other things are an opportunity for folks to engage with the department and ask questions, and we consider this to be technical assistance. If you visit our website, you can find out more information about the different tools and resources that are available, but DCR does not provide business or legal advice. Generally, we only provide information as it relates to our regulatory processes, including the application process. If you have a record before the department, you will have an assigned analyst who can provide more specific help on your particular record.
Okay, Lucian K asks, when will non-retail licenses with social equity persons be able to transition to not needing the social equity person to remain valid?
That's not a law that is on the books currently, and it's not something that has been discussed or proposed, at least at the policy level, with DCR being asked to provide any recommendations or reports. So I don't know.
Thank you. Hannah H asks, how long is the process to refile a phase 3 application if the applicant moves forward with timely and complete application?
It depends. It's going to come down to the timely and complete application component. If you submitted all of the necessary forms and documents, and you don't have to go through multiple iterations of the equity share review, and the information is consistent with the data uploaded through your record, and you have a location that is prepared to go through the initial inspection process, you should be able to navigate through the application process in 60 to 90 days. Of course, if you have documents that are not complete, it wouldn't be considered a complete application. And then, of course, if there's corrections needed on any operating agreements as it relates to the equity share review, that, of course, will take additional time, and you may incur additional costs for subsequent reviews.
Kevin B asks, what do I need to do to stay in the loop for the next time the opportunity is available?
It's a little too generic for me, but you can sign up for DCR emails through our website, so you're added to the listserv, so that when communications about the technical assistance and the Q&As and some of the different programming that the department is providing are sent out, you receive the email notification of those opportunities.
Okay. Irvin P asks, what's next for round 2?
Specifically, I'll be hosting a technical assistance webinar number 3 on September 28th to discuss the lottery registration process. Currently, DCR is in the middle of the 90-day processing window, which will hopefully conclude on Sunday, October 23rd. We've begun to provide the technical assistance as required by the code so that we can open up the lottery registration process as soon as it is feasible. And then, of course, we've got to have a 30-day lottery registration process before we have the ability to administer the lottery. And the code requires us to provide 15 days advance notice of when and where the lottery will be held before we hold it. So what's next? There's going to be more technical assistance made available. I'll be doing training on how to register for the lottery, and we will be going through that process on September 28th. So I encourage you to join this webinar. And then, of course, we will begin to send out communications and confirmations to folks that did request verification. And the first wave will be sent out on or around September 30th.
Jumaine R asks, can you move out of your community plan? My investor has another property in my community plan and they are already open, and real estate is hard to find in my current plan.
So if this is related to the retail storefront or the cultivation commercial cannabis activity types, those are geo-fenced to their existing community plan area and cannot move outside of the community plan area. If the application is abandoned, it does give you the opportunity to refile within the same community plan area. But even licensees are not able to move outside of their community plan area. DCR will be providing the Planning and Land Use Management Committee with a list of options for how relocations can be administered differently. And then it'll be up to the policymakers to decide whether or not they want to select one of the proposed options or propose their own option. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, Hannah A. Are expedited tier 1 and 2 options no longer available for refiled applications?
At this time, we have turned off the ability to request expedited services because of our vacancy rate. Of course, if everybody is requesting expedited services, it's not really expedited because everybody is in a different queue and it's being processed based on our capacity. We have hired 7 additional members of our licensing team in the last 30 days. Those folks are getting trained up and they're also assisting us with the eligibility verification process. The Civil Service Commission allocated an additional 12 positions to be filled, and the DCR executive team has interviews set up over the next 30 days to fill a majority of those positions. And then, of course, as we bring on new hires and get them trained up and our vacancy rate does get back below 20%, we will reopen the option for the expedited services and make it available on the different record types.
Okay, thank you. Tiana W has 2 related questions. I'll ask them one at a time. The first one is it more beneficial to file for a C Corp or an LLC when starting a small cannabis business? I've heard you can get double taxed as a sole proprietor LLC. Is this true?
So I'm sorry, but DCR does not provide business advice. If you are a social equity individual applicant, you may want to sign up for one of the one-on-ones with subject matter experts, which are the vendors that Dr. Brown and the social equity team administer for this type of advice, or sign up for the pro bono or low bono legal program so you can speak with a lawyer who is a subject matter expert on business formations and taxation.
Okay, I'll ask her a second question. Can you use an existing LLC for the new process, or do you have to file a new one specific to cannabis? For example, I have an LLC for jewelry making. Can I use the same LLC for this?
There's nothing that precludes you from using an existing LLC for your application, but you may want to speak with an attorney or other advisor as to what the ramifications could be if you commingle the activities. There are certain activities like the sale of tobacco and alcohol that cannot be commingled at the same location, and that would be reviewed as part of our normal application process with the attestations. But if you have questions about whether or not you should commingle activities with an existing LLC, I do recommend you seek professional advice.
Thanks, Jason. Nick S. asks, how will the lottery pick people?
It's going to be a randomized selection process. And when we are at a point where we would be able to lawfully administer the lottery, we plan to share additional details.
Okay. Nay, Ruth B asks, has DCR, I think we've asked that question, so let me skip to the next one. We have an anonymous question. Will DCR allow a licensed and operational company, phase 2, tier 3, with temporary approval for cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution to transfer 2 of those license activities through an asset or stock sale to a new company through, they have a license here, license 4006-mod entity substitution request?
So folks can submit entity substitutions or ownership modifications currently. And phase 1 and phase 2 applicants do have the ability to bifurcate their licenses. So you can do what it was stated, which is, based on my understanding, they have 3 activities. The existing licensee would maintain the distribution license, and they would seek to do entity substitutions for the cultivation and manufacturing. As long as they have received temporary approval, which is a form of licensure, they would be eligible to submit that entity substitution request.
Okay. Wade O asks, how many requests did you get and how many requests are eligible?
We received 1,275 requests, and I anticipate that less than 1,000 of those requests will be deemed eligible based on our current processing. However, we're not going to have final numbers until all of the requests have been processed, and DCR does have until Sunday, October 23rd by code to get the processing done. And if we're unable to get everything processed by that date, the code does allow for us to take additional time.
Okay, Barry F asks, how long does it take to get a license from the lottery pick?
So the lottery does not give you a license. If you are selected through the lottery, you have an opportunity to submit an application for the retail storefront commercial cannabis activity type. And you'll have to go through the formal application process and meet the criteria and the requirements before you receive a license. And it's really going to depend on how prepared you are and whether or not you've taken any proactive steps to set yourself up for success if you are selected through the lottery, so that you can quickly navigate through that application process. Somebody that has registered a BTRC, already created their entity, they've looked for investors and raised capital, they've created their legal entity record, is going to be better positioned to quickly navigate through the application process than somebody who starts to make those concrete business decisions after they're selected.
Ashley D asks, if DCR issues temporary approval for an activity that is not located in the correct zone, does this mean that DCR considers the applicant exempt from the zoning restrictions?
No, it does not. So there were certain license applications that were temporary granted limited grandfathering, and the old municipal code was based on somebody being compliant at a location when a license was issued. So DCR was processing applications that were not located in the correct zone, and DCR cannot exempt somebody from the zoning restrictions. They are what they are.
Okay, Coach R asks, do you have a list of grants?
Ethan from the social equity team, I believe is on the call, and he may have a list of the grants. If he's able to unmute himself and kind of speak to current grants we have, I would appreciate it. I do know that we do have grant specific information available on our website. So I'm not hearing Ethan. So I would refer you to our website, and you can also email the DCR SCP account. It's dcr.scp@lecity.org, and the social equity team would be able to get you the information you're seeking.
Okay, Maximus asks, will changes in portal application move application review further down the list?
I don't actually understand what the question means. So the changes that have been implemented through the portal are intended to streamline the application review process so that documents that get reviewed that don't change between applications, such as the ownership, the legal entity, whether or not somebody meets the equity share requirements for the entity as submitted, don't have to be re-reviewed if additional applications are submitted, and that we're only focusing on doing reviews of those documents when the entity requests a modification to those documents. What we have proposed and started to implement is a streamlining that is intended to reduce fees as well as reduce the cumbersome renewal process and the application processing to better situate applicants so that when they do submit an application, they can more quickly navigate through that process by taking things like the review of the entity, the equity share review, and other things off of the table. So it's already done before they lock in a location through the pre-application review and temporary approval application process. So the director's mandate has been to make the process more business friendly and to streamline the process with the goal of reducing the fees and making our process more accessible to stakeholders.
Okay, LaShonda H asks, how can persons who were homeless provide proof of living in California if they did not have an address or ID? Does that eliminate them from SEIA verification?
It doesn't inherently eliminate them from being able to apply if they had reached out to one of the homeless services providers and there's documentation that showed that they were homeless in a disproportionately impacted area that could be documented by that homeless services provider, that may be evidence towards meeting some of the different eligibility criteria. So we do require documentation, and there's different ways that folks have gotten the documentation necessary to be verified. And homeless service providers and the letters from them that demonstrated that a person was homeless in a geographic area that was recognized as being disproportionately impacted, as well as the period of time that they were receiving services, has been used to verify other social equity individual applicants.
Thank you. Stanley B asks, What tax breaks are available on the federal side?
So commercial cannabis activity is unlawful at the federal level. I would advise you to contact a tax advisor or an attorney who specializes in taxation to get a better understanding of what tax breaks or incentives may be available given the federal prohibition.
Elizabeth B. asks, is DCR currently adhering to its processing timelines? Has DCR suspended timelines due to staffing shortages?
So the municipal code suspends the timelines when DCR's vacancy rate exceeds 20%. Currently, DCR has a vacancy rate above 20%. Therefore, it's automatically suspended based on the municipal code. For most processing activities, staff are processing requests within the processing timelines. We are working to fill our land use position, which unfortunately is vacant and is kind of critical to the application process. And we do anticipate that in the next month, month and a half, that position will be filled and we will quickly train up the replacement in order to get back on track with the land use related processing timelines.
Okay. Lucy N. asks, for delivery, can we use phone apps to track the driver, or does it have to be a GPS device?
So the rules and regulations do not allow you to use a phone to track the driver. Rocky, who heads up our compliance and enforcement unit, is preparing additional information as it relates to compliance with the rules and regulations. And this is one of the topics that is covered. So I would recommend once we get that page up and running, you go ahead and go through the information and procedures bulletins and the FAQs associated with compliance with the rules and regs.
Okay. Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say, I can probably stick around for 5 or 10 more minutes, but I do have a hard stop in other meetings that I'm going to have to get to. I believe we've gotten through 40 or 50 questions, but I can stick around for a few more. If you could please look at kind of the questions to figure out which are the most pressing ones, we can do another 10 minutes of questions before I have to stop.
Okay, I'll ask the next question for now, and I'll get some feedback on the following questions. But Katie P. asks, will DCR consider allowing EMMDs to be permanently grandfathered in their current location and remove the December 31st, 2025 deadline?
DCR had previously proposed the elimination of the sunset date for the limited grandfathering. The policymakers did not adopt that recommendation. However, they did extend the sunset date from December 31st, 2022 through December 31st, 2025. Realistically, with the phase out of the state provisional licensure process, it could be something that policymakers want to consider in advance of the sunset date, but it's not something that DCR has been asked to provide recommendations on, and we did previously provide recommendations which resulted in the extension of the sunset date to where it is now.
Okay, Daryl C. asks, what license can I apply for if I don't have a physical building location?
So you can create your legal entity record. You could request equity share review if you're going to be applying for an activity that's limited to social equity applicants. However, you do have to have a proposed business premises location to start an application. The first part of the application process is the pre-application review to determine whether or not that proposed location is eligible for further processing. You don't have to have an executed lease or site control at the time you go through the pre-application review process, but in order to submit a complete application, you will have to have site control. And if you're unable to get site control, you're not going to be able to receive a license.
Thanks, Jason. Elizabeth B. asks, please provide a CEQA update.
So businesses that have received temporary approval are eligible to complete the LIC 4013 form, which is the final project description form that is utilized by the city to determine whether or not a project could be categorically exempt from CEQA. We are using a bench of environmental consultants that was curated by the Department of City Planning. We are currently working on a request for bids where consultants are basically competing to complete the review for the forms that have been submitted to date, and we will continue to do that on a rolling basis. We believe that the first set of forms will be completed and reviewed and transmitted back to the department for further review later this year.
Okay, Nita M. asks, is the BTRC record kept by DCR only, or is the form passed on to the state as well?
So the business tax registration record is an Office of Finance record for your local taxpayer number. So when you submit your application through the DCR email, we forward it over to the cannabis unit at Finance, where they can review it and issue a BTRC number, and then we can communicate it back to you so that you can register your legal business entity. To my knowledge, the taxpayer information form is not shared with the state, but that would be a great question for the Office of Finance. DCR doesn't provide that information to the state.
Okay, Yelena asks, if an entity has multiple licenses, what record number should be included on the forms uploaded when creating a legal entity record?
You can do it a couple of different ways. So the goal here and what we're going to be doing through the 2023 renewal process is we're going to be making all of the application and license records a child of the parent entity record. So it's all under that umbrella. So if the legal entity record is modified, we're able to push those modifications down to all of the corresponding application and license records. You know, to the extent that you're able to give us like a document, you could upload a PDF at the end of the form that lists all of the records that need to be housed under that legal entity. It makes my life a little bit easier. But if you can't provide all of the records as we go through the renewal cycle and as we start to go through the applications that are still pending, we will be making those linkages. And you know, we can't make those linkages until the legal entity record is completed. So I'm hopeful folks are going to be diligent about doing that leading up to the 2023 renewal process.
Okay, thank you. Are you okay to continue, Jason?
I have a few more minutes, yeah.
Okay, so Joe R. would like to know, I have heard that PCN will start fourth quarter. What month in fourth quarter is it starting so applicants can get a head start to locate properties?
So the opening of PCN is going to be triggered by DCR's ability to complete the social equity individual applicant verification process, as well as the administration of the lottery. So I view PCN as a relief valve. So after we've completed the lottery and we've selected a sufficient number of individuals that are going to be eligible to apply for the remaining licenses DCR does not need a council finding to issue, it would be appropriate to open the PCN filing period for a limited period of time so that folks that are not selected or maybe pursuing a license in a community plan area that is subject to a finding of undue concentration would be eligible to participate in the social equity program. So I'm hopeful that we can get it open before the end of the year. We're going to be doing our sensitive use update again in early November, and that sensitive use data is good for 3 months. So I'm hopeful that that data will be utilized both for the administration of the lottery as well as for the opening of the PCN process. So stay tuned.
Okay, Jason, I've got 2 potential questions, but I just want to check your time, 1 or 2.
I can do 2 more.
Okay. Andrea C. asks, will applicants who are, sorry, let me start that again. Will applicants who are approved for phase 3, round 2, be able to apply for cultivation licenses immediately?
The answer is no. So phase 3 retail round 2 is specific to an opportunity to apply for the retail storefront, which is the type 10 license type. It doesn't have anything to do with cultivation licenses.
Okay. And then Hector G asks, where in the Excella portal will it be noted if we have been approved or denied for SEIA?
So when you log into your individual user account, there is an account management section within the portal. So that's got your contact information and other relevant information. Whether or not you've been verified under the 2022 criteria will appear on that page. And stay tuned for the next technical assistance webinar, which we're going to be doing on September 28th, because I will be sharing images from the licensing portal, and I would probably be able to better address that specific question with an image in that presentation.
Would you like me to continue, Jason, or do you need to hop?
I will go for another 4 minutes.
Okay. Let me see. From Christians, go ahead.
And we're keeping track of the questions that are submitted and the questions that are coming in through the chat. So, to the extent that we can compile those or fold them into our FAQ, we'll do our best to do that, after the session. And some of the questions we can carry forward to the next Q&A session.
Christian C asks, how often is the DCR licensing map being updated to reflect the actual and current number of retail non-PCN application slots available for the upcoming lottery?
So 2 questions there. For the first one, I do my best to try to update information on a monthly or every other month basis. Without a land use analyst, it has been difficult because they were dedicated to doing that. I am working with the Excella team to set up an interface between the DCR licensing portal and ArcGIS Online, which is what's housing our licensing map, so that the information could be pushed in more real time. We could do overnight patching so that the layers for pre-applications, pending applications, temporary approvals, modification requests, social equity businesses can all be populated with real-time data. So the manual updating of the map is no longer a thing. And I hope to have that in place before the end of the calendar year. But for now, it's going slower than I want, but we will have the map updated as well as the numbers prior to the administration of the lottery. And I anticipate by the end of October, it'll be updated. But undue concentration and our ability to select people is triggered based on the number of licenses still available in that community plan area, not the number of pending applications. So those numbers change day to day based on the issuance of new licenses.
Are you able to hear me? I'm having some technical issues.
I did not hear the next question. I
Okay.
apologize.
Okay, so I think it's Christopher P. If an applicant receives temporary approval between now and November 2nd, are they still required to submit a renewal application and pay the corresponding fees?
Yes. So ultimately, if an application was submitted prior to September 1st, 2022, the fees paid were for calendar year 2022, and any temporary approval issued is only valid through the end of the current year, and any licenses, including that temporary approval, would expire after 11:59 p.m. on December 31st. So if you plan to continue operating into 2023, you would have to submit a renewal application and pay the corresponding fees.
Okay, I think that's it.
You want to throw one more at me?
Oh, okay, if you'd like to. Um, what is the process of transferring a license to another physical location, timeframe, and CEQA requirement?
So the CEQAs, the time frame is going to vary applicant to applicant. The first step is going through the modification request, submitting the relocation modification, the department doing the land use review, which is taking probably anywhere from 30 to 90 days right now. Once the location is deemed eligible for further processing, we create a new temporary approval record for the proposed location. You have 30 days to populate that with the documents and pay the corresponding fees. To the extent that you have opportunities to cure, it really gives you like a full 90 days to provide us with an executed lease before the record gets abandoned. Once you get the temporary approval record filed, it'll take anywhere from 60 to 90 days for DCR to complete the review, do the initial inspection, and issue a new temporary approval. Getting your temporary approval is a prerequisite under the current law to start the environmental review process, which is the CEQA process, which is the prerequisite to start the annual application process. So the good news is the director is working on a way for the application process to be streamlined so that on a go forward basis, it would be an option for somebody just to submit an annual application, which meets all of the requirements to get an annual license, which would allow for somebody to start CEQA in advance of receiving a temporary approval license. More information to come on that later.
Okay. I understand we're going to try for one more. Vivian, you asked, first year applicants are struggling to stay open in the first year. Are there payment plans or waivers for the LA City cannabis taxes? For example, California Department of Tax and fee enables cannabis businesses to enter into monthly repayment plans.
So there's two separate things going on there, and it'll really depend on, for the fee payment type, DCR has received limited state grant funding in the past to provide fee waivers. We are providing fee waivers for the environmental review process as well as the annual application process for existing licensees who meet the criteria to participate in those programs. The director does have the discretion to provide fee deferrals. Both our old director, Kat Packer, and our current director, Michelle Garakian, have allowed for the phase 2 applicants who are still in the application process but have not received temporary approval to receive fee deferrals for the local authorization renewal fees that would otherwise be due under 10408. And then, of course, once they do receive a license, they are responsible for paying, the back due fees. So there are a couple of ways where DCR has the discretion to defer something, which is akin to a payment plan. But as it relates to taxes, the Office of Finance can allow for a payment program Typically, they don't do it for new businesses, and businesses do have to remit taxes on a monthly basis, and finance won't let businesses really get too far behind on the taxes, like more than a quarter. And typically that doesn't reach the threshold to warrant a payment plan. If they do have any payment plans, you are required to have everything fully paid off within a year, and it's finance's discretion, and DCR has no oversight over that. But if you aren't compliant in good standing with the Office of Finance, it will impact your ability to lawfully operate and your license standing with the Department of Cannabis Regulation, and potentially your ability to renew that license. So I believe that was the last question. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in today. We will be doing this again, of course, next month. This is a monthly Q&A session. We are also doing technical assistance as it relates to the administration of the Phase 3 Retail Round 2 lottery registration process. The next webinar on that is going to be on Wednesday, September 28th. So I look forward to folks participating in that webinar as well as our next Q&A session in October. So thanks everybody for coming in today, and I hope everybody has a great remainder of the day and stay safe. We do also have a commission meeting later next week, and the licensing team, social equity team, and compliance and enforcement team will be providing updates to the commission, as well as a presentation from our director and just giving them general updates. So we do have a commission meeting next week, which will be another opportunity for you to get information from the department and or provide public comment to our commissioners. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, and I hope you have a great day.